A message from your scribe.
If you recognize that chin, you know that marrying your favorite cousin might not be the best idea. Avoiding marriages within the family seems universal and deeply rooted in the essence of humanity, although different communities present different views on the reasons behind this state of affairs. Sociologists like Edward Westermark argued that children raised together until the age of 6 usually show no interest in each other as adults. This is said to result from a process called imprinting, a simplified way of saying the ingraining of a pattern typical for the species. Social, legal and cultural norms also play a significant role. According to Freud, these norms are the only things preventing deeper than usual family relationships, such as mothers with sons or fathers with daughters. Freud assumed that parents feel the strongest attraction to the children of the opposite sex. And then there's natural selection, which definitely doesn't reward incest, as reflected in the images of various European royal families. Despite all this cultural and genetic background, incestuous relationships exist and have existed for millennia, and not all civilizations were condemning them. The issue of incest, a phenomenon now occurring rather marginally, surprisingly receives a considerable amount of attention in written culture. After all, everyone has probably heard of the Oedipus complex. However, let's take a look at another work, namely the Old Testament. If we were to take the book of Genesis literally, the third generation of humans would have to bear the label of those born from an incestuous relationship. After all, with whom else could Cain and his brother Abel have married if not with their sisters? But the creation myth remains just a myth, right? Not only contemporary biblical scholars assume that Adam and Eve were not the only humans at the time of our species' creation. In any case, even if other people were walking on the earth during these legendary events, the probability that Cain and Abel took wives from their own families remains high. This is because the Israelites preferred to marry within their tribe. This phenomenon is called endogamy. What we observe in the Bible is not a unique occurrence globally, as many societies, both in the times of these stories and today, practice endogamy, although such groups are now considered rather eccentric. The reason for the reception of endogamous marriages probably don't need much explanation. Endogamy often occurs in religious communities and its purpose is to preserve identity or a unique status in relation to people from other groups. It shouldn't surprise us that Israelites preferred to marry other Israelites. After all, a common language, culture and religion have a significant influence on matrimonial preferences. However, it is precisely the last element, religion, that narrows the choice of a life partner. Do not worship any other god, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Be careful not to make a treaty with those who live in the land, for when they prostitute themselves to their gods and sacrifice to them, they will invite you and you will eat their sacrifices. And when you choose some of their daughters as wives for your sons, and those daughters prostitute themselves to their gods, they will lead your sons to do the same. The author of the book Deuteronomy expresses a similar sentiment, where representatives of other nations are to be literally exterminated, and it's inconceivable for Israelites even to consider choosing wives from among captured women. There is no mention of giving a daughter in marriage, not even to the wealthiest Amorite. Both passages illustrate the threat that marriages with individuals outside the religious group posed. A potential spouse not adhering to Judaism was seen as bringing the religion into the family. This religiously motivated xenophobia makes sense when we consider that during that period the Israelites were not yet monotheists, but rather monolatrists. Despite elevating their god to a pedestal and the pressure from the priestly case to worship only him, it didn't mean that Israelites completely rejected the existence of other gods. The prohibition of marriages with followers of other religions embodied the first commandment, which requires worship of only one god. And it was quite justified. The Israelites were still susceptible to the influence of other nations, as evidenced by King Solomon, who, under the influence of his many wives, began introducing foreign cults in the kingdom of Israel. The king worshipped Ashtoreth, but also erected statues and altars to Chemosh and Molech. He faced punishment for this. His sons were not to sit on the throne of the kingdom. A much worse fate awaited the Israelites who entered into intimate relationships with the Moabite women in Shittim. These women not only engaged in lovemaking with the Israelites, but also encouraged them to worship Baal and offer sacrifices to him. This displeased their leader Moses, who ordered the killing of all of those who had committed idolatry. According to the book of Numbers, 24,000 people perished at that time. The punishment for a relationship with a person from another nation is death. However, the tradition of the Israelites seemed to narrow the circle of choice even further, especially evident in the book of Genesis. Let's ask the most important patriarchs about the chosen ones of their hearts. Abraham's wife was Sarah, also being his half-sister born of the same father Terach. Isaac's wife was Rebekah, the granddaughter of Abraham's brother. This family tradition was continued by their son Jacob, to whom his father gave clear instructions on where to find a wife. So Isaac called for Jacob and blessed him. Then he commanded him, "Do not marry a Canaanite woman. Go at once to Paddan Aram, to the house of your mother's father Bethuel. Take a wife for yourself there, from among the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. May God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and increase your numbers until you become a community of peoples." The narrative in the book of Genesis is crafted in a way that all descendants who did not adhere to the principles of marriage within the family were excluded from the main line of inheritance. The firstborn son of the Abraham and the slave Hagar is exiled to the desert. We only know that he took an Egyptian wife and lived in the wilderness. However, his further fate remains unknown. Similarly, the situation unfolds with the firstborn son of Isaac, Esau, who sold his birthright to Jacob for a bowl of lentil stew. Esau married 2 Hittite women, and we are left in the dark about the fate of his lineage as well. It seems that behind these stories lies a rather obvious intention of the authors of the book of Genesis. The purpose of such composition is to remind Israelites that they should carefully choose their future spouses. For those whose own genealogy was deeply cherished, such a reminder was probably unnecessary. However, for those Israelites who had a thought of entering into relationships with encountered Hittites or Edomites along the way, the book of Genesis serves as a kind of subtle tip on how to keep their family tree pure. After all, there's a reason why the Torah is literally translated as an instruction. The endogamy of the Israelites primarily serves the preservation of identity, which is crucial in a relatively small religious community. When marriages occur within the closer family circle, it has an additional advantage. Abraham and his descendants could share exactly the same views, much like the Habsburgs. Identity and the pure genealogical line are significant, but matters related to inheritance are no less important. Abraham not only sent away his firstborn son Ishmael, but also others he had with a secondary wife Keturah. Thanks to this, he was able to keep all financial resources within one tribe or clan. From later passages in the book of Genesis, we learn that Ishmael's descendants who founded their own clans competed with Abraham's descendants. Hence, centralizing the estate within one family was crucial to maintain a dominant position among other tribes that were constantly fighting for power. Another action to strengthen the lineages was the ancient practice of levirate marriage. It mandated a man to marry his deceased brother's wife if the latter died too early. If children were born from this forced marriage, according to customary law, they did not count as the offspring of the biological father, but rather of the deceased. All this was done to ensure the line of inheritance remained unthreatened. The role of the brother-in-law was somewhat thankless, so not everyone decided to fulfill this duty. Those who opted out of marriage could be publicly scorned by the elders and the widow, and be labeled in Israel as the family of the unsandaled. But now let's go back to the topic of incest. While the Israelites didn't see an issue with engaging in intimate relationships with cousins or step-siblings, the situation was entirely different within the closer family circle. The sole example of such behavior can be found in the account of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot, a fugitive from the ravaged Sodom, is portrayed as the only righteous man in the city. When 2 mysterious men, later revealed to be divine messengers, appear at his doorstep, Lot defends them, refusing to surrender them to the city's inhabitants who, as the book praises, sought to violate them. Lot holds the value of hospitality so high that he even offers his own daughters to the citizens to prevent any harm to his guests. From today's perspective, this proposition is immoral, but in those times, Lot's actions were considered entirely normal and didn't elicit any reflection from the author. Later, when the city is destroyed, Lot and his daughters seek refuge and find it in the mountains. It is there that the act of the incest takes place. Lot and his 2 daughters left Zoar and settled in the mountains, for he was afraid to stay in Zoar. He and his two daughters lived in a cave. One day, the older daughter said to the younger, "Our father is old and there is no man around here to give us children, as is the custom all over the earth. Let's get our father to drink wine and then sleep with him and preserve our family line through our father." That night they got their father to drink wine and the older daughter went in and slept with him. He was not aware of it when she lay down or when she got up, so both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their father. Lot's daughters managed to get him drunk not once, but twice. This led to an intercourse as a result of which both of them bore children. The son of the older daughter was named Moab, while the younger one gave birth to Ben-Ami. These individuals were destined to become the progenitors of the Moabite and Ammonite peoples, with whom the Israelites later engaged in struggles for dominance in Canaan. In the book there doesn't seem to be any explicit condemnation of Lot's daughter's actions. In the act of incest itself, the author doesn't see anything inherently wrong. The moral objection arises in the offspring, which is deemed wicked and unrighteous. In this context, it signifies the future enemies of Israel. Perhaps in this rather veiled manner the narrative serves as a warning against intimate relations within the closest family circles? Who knows? In the dusk of the nomadic era, during the times of Moses, explicit prohibitions against incest emerged. Some scholars suggest that the shift in attitudes toward the intra-family marriages among the Israelites was influenced by the observations of the court of Ramesses II. In his own way, Ozymandias elevated incestuous practices to monstrous proportions by engaging in marriages and fathering children with several of his own daughters. These extraordinary accomplishments were intended to leave a lasting impression on the collective thought of the Israelites. Coupled with the trauma of long captivity, it was meant to instill a deep-seated aversion among the Israelites embarking on a decades-long journey not only towards the Pharaoh, but everything associated with him. This included the rigorous endogamous practices, which in subsequent books of the Old Testament are only a distant memory. If you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel.